Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. Today we're taking a look at the brand new Radiomaster TX16s Mark II. Before we get into the content, I need to let you know this video is sponsored by Radiomaster, who sent me this TX16s Mark II for review. I'd like to say thanks to Radiomaster for hooking me up with this sample and encourage you guys to check out my affiliate links in the description if you'd like to grab one of these Mark II radios for yourself. All right, let's get started. All right, guys, for my review, we're going to cover some of the common things that you'll find on most of the review channels regarding the pots and the gimbals. We'll cover that kind of thing, but we're also going to take the cover off and get into the electronics and talk about some of the detail behind what's changed on this radio. The first thing we'll get into are the gimbals. These are Radiomaster's V4 gimbals, and they use the same chipset as the AG01, which improves things like sensitivity, center positioning, and temperature tolerance. So a nice upgrade in terms of the sensor. And then also they've included some mechanical adjustments. I'll put a picture up in post so you can see what these do, but bottom line, numbers 1 and 2 here, they control stick travel, so they let you adjust the travel of the stick. I don't know that you necessarily want to reduce this unless you're worried about the throw being too much, because if you do reduce the travel, then you also kind of reduce the resolution available in the movement of the stick as well. There's a little number 3 here that lets you adjust the horizontal tension, so basically for a mode 2 radio, this is your aileron, it lets you adjust that tension. And then numbers 4 right here and 5, they let you adjust the gimbal mode setting and the vertical axis. So by turning this screw, number 4, clockwise, you can disable self-centering, and it basically turns it into, switches the mode. So it becomes a non-centered stick like over here on the left. And then number 5 adjusts the vertical tension. You have the same mechanical adjustments on both gimbals. Just remember that this gimbal is actually rotated 180 degrees. So if you're using the picture until you get familiar with the adjustments, you can always just flip the radio over and that will align the gimbal up with the picture in case you need the picture to help figure out what's what. One of the big things you'll hear about upgrades on this radio are the pots. They really made a big change on S1, S2, and the sliders, which have a much more robust detent. There should be no more complaints about the ability to find center. It is now a very solid detent on the S1, S2, and the sliders. Another big improvement I noticed is how much more firm these pots feel in their housing. So the S2 and S1 pots don't move at all. Compared to the Mark I, you can see how much movement I have on these. And that's not damaged. All my Mark I radios have the same kind of movement up top. So definitely an improvement in terms of stability there. It just feels better. Around the back of the radio, there's some notable upgrades as well. The most prominent is they included a new set of grips for the back. These are a flat grip compared to the tall grips on the Mark I radio. So for those of you who felt the prior radio was just a little too thick for your hands, these are flatter and they allow you to get your hands around the back of the radio much easier. The battery bay door has also been improved with a little bit of a notch that lets you get a grip on there and to pull that battery door down. And then inside the cover, I noticed that there is a hole in the center, and I think that's, I'm not sure if that's pre-production or if that's a testing interface or if it has something to do with ELRS modules, but there is a new hole in the back of this JR bay. Another little improvement are these small scallops. They're rounded out finger scallops compared to the square edge over here on the prior model. So it's just a nicer look overall. It looks a little bit more refined, I guess. Radiomaster also included a headphone jack on the back, so if you have a Vario or you want your radio talking to you and you have other flyers nearby, you can plug your headset in and your radio audio will come out through the headset. The battery bay looks to be about the same to me. I didn't see any physical differentiation inside the battery bay. The last thing on the back is this little plug, and the idea behind that plug is it allows you to do upgrades. So if you want to mount an external device, maybe an external receiver, you have a channel into the radio without having to drill holes in the case if that's what you want to do. I was a little disappointed that Radiomaster stuck with a non-folding handle on the Mark II. After having used the folding handle on the Mark I, that is my preference, but I realize that is subjective as well, so your taste may vary. But for me, I personally like the folding handle, and this radio will definitely be getting a folding handle. On the front of the radio, there were no significant layout changes. All the buttons and switches and knobs are all in the same place, so nothing really material there. One thing I did notice is on the gimbals, they no longer paint the white tick marks on the gimbal, so you don't have the index lines. Not that that necessarily matters. I don't really think there was a functional use for that anyway. I certainly never used them. You know, if I wanted to understand deflection from center, I would be more inclined to use the channel monitor. Just an observation that they took that out. Another thing I noticed about the physical layout are these side buttons feel like they're a little bit higher than the stock radio. So on the stock radio, not quite as high. I mean, they're still discernible, but on this side, they just feel like they're a little bit higher. I also kind of wish they would have silk screened the labels in for return, page right, page left, and tele, but they didn't. And again, that's a subjective thing. You know, you may have a completely different opinion than I do on that, but I'd kind of wish they would silk screen those in, because I think for people that are new to the radio, that would be helpful learning how to navigate. Another subtle little upgrade on the case is this finger scallop to help you open the bottom lid to get access to the charging port and the UARTs and your SD card. On the Mark I, instead of having that scallop, you can see it's kind of flat there. They just put a dimple in the rubber itself. I think this is a cleaner look and probably sits on the table a little flatter anyway. Under the top cover, you've got a USB-C interface for access to the SD card or joystick mode and serial mode. And then you've also got a standards-based 3.5mm TRS socket, which replaces that funky 16.8mm tip ring socket on the first gen. Under the bottom cover, you've got the same two serial interfaces that we had on the Mark I, along with a charge port and the SD card slot. So no real changes on the bottom other than that little finger scallop. Okay, that covers the outside of the radio. Let's take a look on the inside. One of the first things I noticed when I cracked the case is this lead that runs from the main board over to the external speaker jack and the rear-facing speaker. There are a number of changes on the inside of the radio, and the first of which is the addition of a USB charging controller. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The Mark I actually took power directly from the USB port on the bottom, and there was no feedback to USB-C delivery devices, so you couldn't take advantage of some of the more advanced power delivery protocols available in modern chargers. The first USB charge controller was a Chipstar 5080E, and that actually had a lower current capacity than the one they switched to about midstream in the production cycle when they moved to the Chipstar 5090E. That chip was able to do 1.5 amps, but it was not able to do power delivery protocol. The Mark II uses an IP2326 chip. The nice thing about that is it's a USB charge chip that can actually communicate with PD devices via control lines. This is a benefit for you because it allows the radio to use the QC3 or Quick Charge 3 protocol. That's a big improvement over the Mark I, which had no standard. What that means in practical terms is the charger can feed the radio the amperage and voltage it asks for. I've done some testing on the charge rates, and I can tell you the radio takes 7 volts, about 1.5 amps, so it's somewhere around 10 watts of input, but it's locked in at that rate. So once it hits that 1.5 amps and switches over to QC3, that's it. It just kind of stays there until that battery is charged up. On the Mark I, the amperage used to cycle up and down quite a bit. On the Mark II, it just locked in at 1.5 amps, and it's very stable. Next up is the rotary encoder. This is an Alps EC10E. This encoder uses a phase shift to tell which direction you're scrolling, and the frequency dictates how fast you're scrolling. The diagram I have on the screen is a schematic for the prior encoder. There are a couple of things I'd like to point out on this. All right, lines A, B, and C are all outputs. So notice line A goes to roller A and B goes to ground. That's actually incorrect. C in this diagram goes over to roller B. The problem with that is that's reversed. It should be C going to ground and B should go to roller B. When this encoder first showed up in OpenTX, the developers had to make a software workaround to accommodate the fact that A went to A and B went to ground instead of B going to B and C going to ground. The way that manifests itself on the first gen TX16s is that sometimes the initial scroll direction was wrong. It would go the wrong way, but then it would correct itself. This next diagram shows the correct wiring where A goes to A, B goes to B, and C goes to ground. And fortunately, the EdgeTX guys were aware of this change, so they've already coded within EdgeTX the adjustments required to accommodate the correct wiring on this roller. The bottom line is this new encoder should improve performance on the radio. When you scroll right, the cursor should go right or up, and when you scroll left, it should go left or down. I've noticed that problem in the past, and now with this new encoder, that should be in the rearview mirror. There were a couple of other electrical modifications on this board to improve switch longevity and to reduce electromagnetic interference in the circuitry, which is really important given the fact that we're dealing with sensitive radio gear for radio control models, right? Radiomaster also changed the haptic motor mount to use a nylon strap, which should help with longevity. And one last thing I'll point out on the board is notice the addition of these new pin headers. Those are for serial ports, so you can connect GPS or Bluetooth or other devices that can take advantage of serial communications with the board. Notice on the Mark I over here on the left, those ports are absent. There is no port here, and there's another one right here that's missing. In the prior version, you could solder onto these ports if you want, but now Radiomaster has included pin headers so you can plug in directly without soldering on your main board, which for some people is going to be a nice upgrade. Also note the 4-in-1 module is on the same revision, 2.3 on the Mark II and 2.3 on the Mark I. Make note on the Mark I gimbals, they use these metal guillotine bars that help with gimbal centering, and on the Mark II with the version 4 gimbals, they went to a plastic arm instead. I've taken off the right slider just to give you an idea of how beefy these pots are. So notice how big this thing is. I'll just put my wrench right on top and to give you an idea for relative size. And in a minute, we'll bring up the other pot. But also notice that's a metal shaft instead of plastic. And here's the Mark I with the plastic slider shaft. So a little bit smaller and definitely a little bit more flexy in the mount. You can see that one moving just a little bit. The Mark II doesn't do that. So the inside of the radio looks very tidy, and they've done a good job caring for wire management and keeping the wires away from moving parts. The only downside is they stuck with these PCBs on these toggle switches up top, and I kind of wish they would have got away from that because, number one, I like to switch my momentary switch to the other side, and number two, if you have a switch go bad, and I have had a switch go bad, it's a lot easier just to change the switch. So the way they currently have it are these toggle switches are attached to these PCBs, and they're not interchangeable. So you can't switch the PCB from one side to the other. You have to actually desolder the switch from the PCB. I really wish they would get away from that and just go to a standalone switch. When I first turned this radio on, the audio prompt sounded a lot lower than my Mark I radios, and I thought there's no way that they hardware-wise reduced the volume of this radio. So I did a little investigation, and here's what I found out. This isn't Radiomaster's fault. They didn't do anything wrong. They were simply using the audio pack from the Edge TX GitHub. The WAV file on the right is the processed WAV file. That's the one included in the zip file. So you'll notice on this one that the peaks are much higher. In fact, they're so high they clip. The other thing you'll notice is that the image on the right, it is cut off immediately at the end of the sound. So at the end of the audio, the file ends. On the file on the left, you'll notice that the file continues after the audio ends for quite some time. And the way that manifests itself when you're listening to it on the radio is dead air. So this is a real easy fix. The answer is go to the Edge TX GitHub, download the SD card archive, and replace the audio files on your SD card with what you find on the GitHub. The developers are already aware of the clipping issue, and I expect they'll get it sorted out on an upcoming release. So if you get a Mark II and you notice that your audio volume is kind of low and lower maybe than a Mark I radio, this is why. You need to get the SD card zip file off the Edge TX GitHub and unpack that into your sounds folder on your radio, and that should get your volume restored back to the normal levels. Let's talk about the sliders. If you look at my screen, I've got my diag screen up, and I want you to pay attention to number 12 down here. I'm going to operate the left slider on the Mark I radio, and notice the range. I go from 760 up to about 1200. So if we round, that's about 500 points of precision on the Mark I slider. On the Mark II, I'm going to operate the right-hand slider. So we'll start at about 1780 and I'm going to slide it all the way down. And you see we stop at around 370, 380. So you get about 1400 points of precision. That's near 12 bits of precision. So if you use your sliders for something other than a binary configuration, like maybe gear, and you're using them for something like maybe flaps or crow braking or something like that, you're going to get a lot more precision in the Mark II sliders than you do on the Mark I. All right, it's time to wrap this video up and give you my recommendation. First off, you guys know I'm a fan of the TX16s. It is my primary radio, and I use it to fly everything I've got. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I commend Radiomaster for making some much needed improvements. They've made the pots better. They've given them a much needed upgrade in terms of that indent. The gimbals are better because they've got improved circuitry along with some mechanical adjustment options on the front faceplate. They've given us ergonomic options with the addition of the new flat grips in the back. They're thoughtful about things like upgrades by putting a plug in the back so we can have access to the inside without drilling holes. They added a couple of headers on that main board inside so you can add a GPS or a Bluetooth module if you want to. They fixed the encoder board so you won't have any more missteps while you're using the scroll wheel. They've improved the resolution of the sliders, so if you want to use them for something other than a binary feature or basic flaps, you can do that. And let's not forget about that upgraded USB charge circuitry. The radio will now do QC3, which will charge at about 7 volts and 1.5 amps, and it'll be much more stable. So overall, the charge time should be reduced when you use this radio. And Radiomaster was able to accomplish all of this without fundamentally altering the layout of the radio. It should feel very familiar to you if you pick one of these up. Regarding a buy, no buy decision on this, if you're looking for a radio and you're looking to get into open source and you want a TX16S, obviously the Mark II is a no-brainer, right? No-brainer in my mind. If you already have a perfectly good TX16S, this upgrade might be a little bit of a pill to swallow because while I do applaud their efforts in making improvements, they are more evolutionary in nature than revolutionary in nature. So only you can really decide if anything you saw here is a must-have feature. There might be certain things hitting the market that you can upgrade on your own without actually having to change your entire radio. For example, that encoder board. So as the parts supply for this encoder board hit the retail channel, you'll probably be able to pick one up and switch it out for yourself. And we already know Edge knows how to recognize it, so you don't have to worry about software. Same thing with the pots. I think the pots will fit in the standard radio. So if you want those upgraded pots and sliders, you'll probably be able to buy them retail once they hit the supply chain. All right, that wraps up my look at the Radiomaster TX16s Mark II. One thing you can count on is this will become my primary radio. I'll be adding my AG01 gimbals. I might change out the faceplate, add some leather grips, kind of get it ready for the field, but this will become my new primary radio for sure. I'd like to thank Radiomaster for sending the Mark II out for review, and I'll remind you guys I've got affiliate links in the description, so if you like what I've done here and you want to get one for yourself, I'd appreciate it if you use my affiliate link. Just remember, it doesn't cost you anything extra. Radiomaster just sends me a little spiff for sending you over there. If you like this kind of content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when new videos hit the channel. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy. Hey, if you like the work I do here on RC Video Reviews, please consider joining me on Patreon. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can help me keep making videos just like this one. If you'd like to help out, there's a link in the description and on your screen.